This eco-village in the south of Portugal runs on their own cryptocurrency called TDF. One TDF allows you to stay there one night per year. Yes, that's per year. Yo, bro, do you want to head down to this place in south of Portugal? It seems pretty wild.
So we just made it to TDF.
So let's say you would go there to build a mushroom farm or a treehouse. Damn, you would get 3 TDF tokens. And I'm not really a crypto person, but after having read their entire OASA white paper, I have to say this project is pretty interesting.
I was just seeing how everywhere around the world, development means just taking a pristine piece of nature and utterly destroying it. And so I wanted to kind of flip that model on its head, leveraging real estate as a force for good and taking the biggest market in the world to fund conservation. The idea is to use technology as like a tool that can align, make it more straightforward to build communities.
There are 3 main ways to get TDF tokens. You could complete a one-off project and get paid when it's done. Secondly, you could apply for a full-time role at TDF and get paid your salary in tokens. And thirdly, you could just buy them. Right now, 1 TDF costs 242 euros and 6 cents, but with every token sold, the price actually increases. So let's say you got yourself 3 tokens. What can you actually do with those tokens? Well, it depends on how much comfort and privacy you want. So you could spend 3 nights per year in a shared glamping or in a small glamping tent. I assume this is private, but not entirely sure. You could go into a shared suite or just 1 night per year in a studio, 6 nights per year if you have a van, and so on. The booking requests go through this platform here, and it's kind of like Airbnb where the host has to approve it. If you have more than 30 tokens, you are a so-called citizen, and then you have access to instant booking. You don't need to wait for approval. One thing I always find really interesting with these kinds of projects is how do they make their decisions? What do people vote on?
Basically, the type of decisions that have to go through the governance is things around changes to the master plan, like whatever we're building, what is a kind of impact on the land, changes to the executive team. So right now I'm leading the team on the ground. If someone else wants to come and take my job, basically, they can put in a proposal and say, hey, I want to become the CEO, I want to run the project or whatever, and then they can put a proposal and go through that.
And then all citizens vote, yes or no?
Yeah, and even anyone who holds tokens. So everything is publicly available. It's on Snapshot, that's where we do the governance. And so anyone who holds TDF tokens can then just vote on those proposals.
The voting strength is actually made up of how many TDF tokens you have, plus the proof of presence, plus proof of sweat. Proof of sweat is something you earn when working there. It's a token that you can't sell or transfer. It just stays in your wallet. It stays tied to you as a person. And that's it. It's like a score in a video game. And proof of presence is similar, but you don't earn it by working there. You just earn it by living there, by being there.
We want people to be able to interact as much as they want with the system without being locked into like a specific dynamic. If you think of traditional governance, like voting in a country, for example, is binary. Either you're a citizen or you're not. And people tend to be citizens of places where they were born, but they might not even really belong there or be part of that community anymore. It's kind of an obsolete way of looking at governance. Proof of presence is kind of taking the opposite. It's like saying, okay, I'm spending actually 1/3 of my year in TDF and 1/3 of my year in Bali and 1/3 of my year in South Africa. So I should be able to split my voting weight across those 3 locations because those are the places that I am invested in, that I'm actually putting my energy into and where I want to see changes happening. And so, yeah, it's quite simple. It's like based on how many days you spend every year, that gives you presence. More recent presence and more recent sweat is more valuable than older ones. So if you worked a little bit 10 years ago, it will still hold like some governance weight, but way less than if you worked last week.
It decays over time.
Exactly.
And that makes a lot of sense because the person who was at the project 5 years ago probably doesn't know how it is right there, right now on the ground. So yeah, it's giving the people who have the most context, the most ground knowledge, the most voting power. Let's talk about what happens if you would want to sell your tokens.
So the tokens are locked initially up until the construction is completed, because we want to be able to control the amount of capital that we raise from the token sale. So therefore we need to be able to set the token price. And so therefore the tokens are not transferable up until the go live event. And so the go live event is basically at the end of the construction, when we raise all the capital that we need to build all the rooms. And then once we have that, then it becomes a liquid market.
I think the setup is pretty smart, because I know so many people, me included, who dream of building a community, but then never actually do it because building is very, cost and labor intensive. And TDF solve both of those problems by selling tokens up front. It brings in the money to fund the construction, and paying workers in tokens brings motivated, skilled people who actually want to work and make the project succeed, unlike typical volunteers from Woofing or Workaway who work for free and might leave any time. It's a way to build a village without needing all the cash up front. But it's also about flexibility and trust.
It enables a project to become liquid, where it's not like this thing where it's like hard to get in, hard to get out kind of thing that you have with a lot of land-based projects. And real estate in general is not very liquid. Through this token, you can trust that you can do some work for the project and be compensated, or put some financial resources into it and be compensated, or like take your resources out when you want to exit. And so you keep the sovereignty of your financial asset. Like, of course, the token price could go down, but it is backed by land, so it's much more like stable than like a typical crypto token.
What happens if the operational expenses skyrocket and you can't sustain that?
So we separated the fees between a utility fee, which covers like electric bill, internet, like this kind of basic stuff. Also maintenance is included in that. And then you have the food budget, which is also separate. And then you have the accommodation budget. So if you don't have tokens, this is a part that you pay, the accommodation budget, which is, like right now it's like 69 euros for a private glamping tent, for example, I think. So that's a part that you get to skip by holding the token. And in the future, like once we have like the nice fancy rooms and so on, obviously the market value of that would be like even higher, like 100, 200 euros potentially. And this is just what you would pay for like more like a hotel type situation. But by holding the token, basically you take away the pressure from the project to be filling the occupancy of the project. So it changes the dynamic, where it's not like a business and customers, it's more like people co-owning like through this citizenship program. So you're part of the project, you have an interest in the project, like developing and so on, and you kind of bond the interest of the people through this kind of Web3 dynamics.
Okay, but what if Sam decides to sell the land?
TDF is the first project within the OASA network. The goal of OASA is to establish a network of these type of spaces around the world. And basically OASA serves as a bit like a land trust, where basically hold the assets in perpetuity in this non-profit entity. And so it has a legal mandate to regenerate those lands. Like we've wrote our regenerative land stewardship principles, which includes like quite stringent criteria in terms of ecological conservation. And because the non-profit is like the ultimate kind of beneficiary, that means that there's no extraction of profits. You can trust that no one's going to come in and like take away the project or whatever. The token holder, I can trust that the project will just continue. Similar to how like Central Park was established like 300-400 years ago as a land trust, and it still exists today. And so the idea is to take away that kind of speculative notion that we put on land, and rather locking our interest in terms of being able to access that land in the future.
Okay, but what if some rich guy just decides to buy all the tokens and take over TDF? What then? Well, they do limit the amount per transaction to 100 TDF. That's probably some technical limit. Then there is a limit per wallet at 915, and then they write the amount of TDF you can buy is 1,500. So I'm assuming this is like a limit, like no one can own more than 1,500. And if there are 18,600 TDF in existence, then that would be just, but as we saw earlier with proof of sweat and proof of presence really like having a big impact in the voting weight as well, they can't really, change everything as they want. And just to understand, the reason why there's 18,600 TDF in existence is because that's what corresponds to the total occupancy eventually available. So here we see all of the different accommodation types, the quantity of people that they can house, and the amount of tokens that they cost per person, and then of course days per year is interesting. They put the glamping and camping for half year only, because I guess they're realistic and saying in winter it's going to be too cold or too rainy, and then they get to the 18,600 tokens and 75 people max occupancy rate. Interesting. But the DAO may decide to build more residential infrastructure, and with that, the TDF supply may increase. So the risk of a single person taking over complete control of the project seems relatively well managed, but let me know what you think.
At its core, OASA is a vehicle to transition from ownership into stewardship. The sense of ownership that we have comes from Roman law, which is the right to use, the right to get a fruit of, and the right to destroy. And that's really not a vision that I can get behind. And as a species, like, private land ownership has really only appeared in the last 300 years. So it is a very recent phenomenon.
Wow.
Even though it seems so powerful and so omnipotent, it's quite a recent phenomenon that everything is just privately owned, and that this right to destroy is applicable everywhere around the planet. And shifting that into a sense of stewardship, which is the right to care for and the right to get the fruit of, that's really just small, tiny change that we're trying to bring and that we're trying to encode into our platform.
Well, let's look at possible failures of OASA and its projects. One could be the construction cost. It just goes through the roof because of whatever reason. What could they do to mitigate it? Well, they can reduce its cost and downscope the amount of construction, which would also mean that there would be less TDF tokens minted or created, because again, each token, you can't just add tokens without adding accommodation. At least that's how I had understood it. But then here on the second point, they say you could sell additional tokens or otherwise dilute the use of the tokens in order to raise the additional funding, which I find a bit problematic, because that's just like printing tokens but not creating the value. And if you give a bunch of people more tokens, and then you have a lot of people who have a lot of tokens and the right to use accommodation, but then they don't have enough accommodation. So maybe Sam, you could comment on this to explain this point. Then they have community falling apart because of disagreement. I don't think it's such a big problem here in this case, because as they wrote as well, members are free to leave and can resell their tokens on the open market. So it's a very flexible setup. And another thing that they do keep on saying is that the tokens are not a financial asset. They do not provide equity, future profit returns, or any stake in the assets of the association. We acknowledge that the narrow scope of OASA tokens as utility only can discourage some to purchase them, especially if utility comes only with DAO membership. That's what they mean with the citizenship. So to conclude, I think it's a very interesting time to be alive. And I know that for some of you watching, you're probably thinking, oh man, this is all like crypto bro talk. And I get where you're coming from. NFTs, crypto, it has a bit of a bad rap. But if you just see it as a tool to create more flexible, transparent, customizable systems of governance, of organizing people, then I'm all for it.